Today, we're going to be talking about best practices for holding meetings, particularly meetings in the hybrid workplace, as it's come to be known. We've got a couple of guest speakers here, and we definitely are going to be recording this session so that we can send it out to folks that can't make it this morning. So just be aware of that. If you don't want to be on the recording, keep your camera off and maybe keep your mic muted. In fact, let's have everybody just double check, make sure your mics are off, so we don't have the cacophonous sounds that come from about 400 people trying to cram into one space. If you are in need of closed captioning, you're probably aware of this, but Google Meet has that option. Just click that button at the bottom there of your screen, the double C in the box there. That'll turn on closed captioning. It's a fairly accurate transcript, not perfect, but fairly accurate. So that's available to you if you need it. We've got a couple of guest presenters today. Oh, before I do that, let's just talk about a couple of things that I want you to be aware of. We have two things that you can take advantage of as leaders of the state of Utah. One is the Supervisor Survival Guide. You may have heard of this. It's some online training for new supervisors, experienced supervisors, and it's geared specifically to state of Utah issues. So if you feel like you need a little bit of development in the leadership area, check out the Supervisor Survival Guide. You can find it by going to the Employee Gateway, finding the Training tab, the drop-down menu. At the very bottom of the drop-down menu, it says Supervisor Survival Guide. Click on that. That'll give you access to just jump in and get started on it. Then we also have this thing called the CLIP assessment. And the CLIP assessment is kind of a one-off coaching session with a survey where you find out, it's basically a chance to take a step back and see how you're perceived by your people. That's available as well. We'll send out this slideshow at the end of this presentation, and these two titles here are actually hyperlinks that will take you to the sign-up sheets for both of those. Next month, we will be talking about truth and transparency and give you some things to add to your tool belt for managing performance. Specifically, we're going to talk about communicating, having those difficult conversations. That will be the off-the-shelf offering for March 16th at 10 a.m., same as usual. All right, so about, I guess it's been, well, it was last year sometime, I gave a presentation on hybrid meetings and virtual teams, and a couple of our guest presenters today heard about it, and they approached me about sharing some of that information. I shared it with them. They're like, we can do better than that, and they came back a few months later with some fully developed thoughts and presentation here, and I was like, wow, can we share this with the whole class? They've done a great job putting this together. Let me introduce to you our guest presenters today. They're both from the Department of Health. This is Dean Whedon, Director of Continuous Quality Improvement at the Department of Health and Human Services. His background is in psychology. He didn't put his undergraduate university, and I practiced saying the name.
That's why I took it off for you.
I appreciate
University
it.
of Gloucestershire, yeah.
Gloucestershire, yeah. Working in organizational psychology, leadership positions at the University of Utah before that, and recently in the Medicaid program. Welcome, Dean. We also have Dr. Sarah Woolsey. She's board certified in family medicine, but she's also the division director for family health and preparedness at the Department of Health. She's a family physician and really happy to be part of the public health community, especially at this time when it's so important. She also is, well, that's me there. She also enjoys kind of diving into the realities of leadership in today's world. And it was her research that we'll kind of rely on today with hybrid meetings. She's found best practices for us. You're going to want to have a way to take notes today, although we will send out this slideshow. You'll want to take some notes about how your teams are working, because, you know, over the last couple of years, we've all become, at least to some extent, hybrid teams. All right, that's me. I'll do that next slide. That's me there. The reason I put this slide up is because I want you to notice that email address. If you'd like to engage more on this topic or any other leadership topic, feel free to reach out, rsmurdoch@utah.gov. I work with DHRM in the Leadership and Organizational Development Group. And our whole thing is to provide support to the leaders and managers in state government. So feel free to reach out, rsmurdoch@utah.gov. All right, with that as introduction, let's go ahead and transition over to Dean Whedon. He's going to take us through some tips for meetings. While he does that, I'll be monitoring the chat. If you have questions or if you want to make comments, feel free to use the chat. Just the icon there on the right-hand side, it's kind of got the talk bubble. I'm sure we're all familiar with it. Feel free to use the chat with your questions, and we'll turn the time over to Dean. Dean.
Thanks, Rick, and good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you to talk about this topic. I don't recall saying we can do a better job, but we will certainly try to do a good job. So thank you for that introduction, Rick. You know, we all spend a tremendous amount of time in meetings, but we don't often spend a ton of time talking about how to make them more effective. And so while this presentation is geared toward how to make hybrid meetings more effective, we thought that we would start out by talking about some of the fundamentals for, of the mechanics of meetings and how to make them effective in general, because that's what we're going to try to, replicate in the hybrid space. And so to do that, I'm going to start by couching this discussion within the general context of organizational communication. So when we think about different ways that we communicate in organizations, including meetings, we can put them on a continuum between rich and lean forms of communication. What we mean by that is two things. So number one, richer forms of communication have more social cues available to them. So I can see you, I can hear you, I can read your body language. Those are so in a rich form of communication, like face-to-face, like video conferencing, I have more social cues available to me. Where in lean forms of communication, I have less social cues available to me to be able to read what's going on. Secondly, the second part of richness and leanness is the immediacy of feedback. And so in a rich setting, I'm able to see you roll your eyes, and I can interact with that right away, immediately. I can stop my message and actually adjust accordingly. I can respond to your questions. In a written form of communication, in an email, for example, that you may not even read it until tomorrow. So the immediacy is less. And so we talk about different forms of communication being on that continuum. Now, notice in this graphic here that you've got face-to-face at the very top, and video conferencing is a close second, but it is second. So it is less rich than a purely face-to-face or in-person encounter. So that's an important consideration as we spend time in the virtual world. Now, when we think about these different forms of communication, we could say, well, then face-to-face encounters are always best. They're richer. Why wouldn't we always use face-to-face communication? Well, the reason is because it's not always efficient. And so what's the guidance on when to use a face-to-face encounter or a meeting versus some other form of communication? There's two things really that we can rely on. Number one being, is the material complicated? If it's complex, it's better to use a richer form of communication so we can take advantage of those two factors, the feedback and the social cues. So is it complicated? And second of all, is it sensitive? If it's sensitive, it's better to use a richer form of communication so that we can manage that sensitivity in real time. So think about, if you've ever gotten a text from someone saying, I'm quitting, most of the time we say, well, that's not really the way that we should communicate that. It's a sensitive topic. We should probably do that face-to-face, that kind of thing. So those are sort of the guiding principles as to when to use richer forms of communication, like meetings, is when it's complicated and when it's sensitive. Now, a caution on this is that people tend to have preferences over which forms of communication they use, regardless of the nature of the message itself. And this is a warning, that we need to be careful with this. So introverts, for example, much prefer to use lean forms of communication. They like to send emails, and that's perfectly okay until the message is complicated or sensitive. Now, extroverts, on the other hand, prefer to use face-to-face encounters, and that's okay too. But sometimes, that's not an efficient way to communicate. It's the message is simple and it's benign. Why do you need a meeting for that? You could use an email communication. So the warning here is to use the form of communication that's fit for the message, not that's fit for your personal preferences. Okay. So while communication is a core function of meetings, there are a number of other functions as well. And it's good to be aware of these because we can sort of, we can judge how we hold our meetings and when we hold our meetings based on some of these other functions. So we're all familiar with communication and coordination and problem solving. That's all fairly obvious. But it's good to be aware of some of these other functions of meetings, because these are always happening as well. So meetings are a great opportunity to reinforce the collective goals of the group, to bring people together to say, this sort of reinforces what we're all about and what it is we're pursuing together. That's an important function of meetings. Another function is accountability. Now, I work in the quality improvement space, and accountability is everything in quality improvement because you're always trying to move change along. And so we use meetings to hold ourselves accountable for the things that we committed to do. So if we commit to do X, Y, and Z, we use meetings to follow up. How did that go? What were the barriers? What do we need to do to keep moving the needle? So accountability is a core function of meetings. Now, the next one is actually really, really critical. And we kind of know it, but we don't recognize it formally. And that's the social function of meetings. So meetings are an opportunity where we actually get to know each other better. We interact with each other. We build trust. We build relationships. And that trust and relationships is what we rely on in the future as we take on new projects and new tasks. So the social function of meetings is really, really important. And then finally, so the collective commitment to decisions. So oftentimes, a decision is made, and if that decision is announced at different times to different people, it can kind of get split up. It can get watered down, or it can get misunderstood. And so using meetings to announce at the same time, and when there's ambiguity or questions, those can be clarified by the same person to everybody at the same time. So that's meeting functions, and so then we start talking about types of meeting. Now, this is useful to sort of keep in mind. So we've got informational meetings like this one, where it's primarily a one-way. It's an announcement or it's a presentation. There's not a lot of interaction. Those are informational meetings, and then we've got brainstorming meetings, which is where we start flinging ideas around. We're sort of very open. All sorts of harebrained thoughts can be passed around just to develop, notions and get ideas flowing. That's a brainstorming meeting. And then we've got meetings that we call constructive meetings. And this is actually what we spend most of our time in, I think, which is where we're problem solving, we're developing solutions, we're developing ideas, we're discussing possibilities and things like that. That's a constructive meeting. And then finally, we've got decision-making meetings where we take different options available to us and weigh them up and decide which way we're going to go. Now, unlike with the functions of meetings where all of those functions are going on at the same time, in types of meetings, we overtly don't want to have different types of meetings going on at the same time. And this is, so if you think about a meeting you were in recently that didn't go so well, there's a good chance that one of the reasons it didn't go so well is that you had people actually holding different meetings. So you had someone over here that was trying to brainstorm still, or still trying to develop an idea, and someone over here is trying to make a decision. They're actually holding two completely separate meetings, and that's why they don't go well. So it's important as you're facilitating meetings that you try to get people actually holding the same meeting at the same time. So I'm going to go through just the next few slides. We're going to talk about preparing for a meeting, starting a meeting, and facilitating a meeting. And we'll hand it over to Dr. Woolsey. So a few considerations before the meeting. So scheduling. Now, this may sound like an odd thing to put on a presentation about just scheduling the meeting, but there's actually a couple of things I really want you to understand and know about this. So first of all, we tend to be really committed to these traditional hour-long, 30-minute timeframes. We're conditioned that way just in our culture. And that's okay. We start meetings on the hour or on the half hour or whatever. But we should be careful about, if we don't need 60 minutes, if we don't need an hour, don't schedule an hour. Be deliberate about how long your meetings are scheduled for. But two, and most importantly for me, is allowing for transition time. Like if you can go away today and do this whole presentation will be worth it for me. So what we mean by this is, something that might be typically scheduled for an hour, starts on the hour, don't schedule it for the full 60 minutes. Schedule it for 50 minutes and end at 50 minutes. Now, why would we do that? Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, people need to eat. People need to use the bathroom, but also people need to sort of, maybe gather their notes or gather their thoughts about what their assignments were in that meeting. But most importantly, we want to give people some transition time to prepare for the next meeting or for the next activity that they're engaged with. If you imagine 8 people coming from 8 different meetings and they have to jump right into the next meeting, first of all, there's a good chance that some of them are going to be late, and that makes that meeting less effective right off the bat. But second of all, none of those people have had time to prepare for what they're going to be talking about in the next meeting or in the next activity. And so giving that transition time really helps with making the subsequent meetings more effective. So that's why we talk about scheduling. Second, we talk about who needs to be present for a meeting. Now, one of the general rules of thumb on this is, once you go beyond 10 to 12 people, you start watering down, you start losing the effect of having people in the meeting. Now, in our environment, that's a necessity sometimes. We just have big meetings, and that's okay. But we should be intentional about who's present. And I've listed some things here that there are good reasons to have people present for a meeting. They either provide expertise, they're a decision maker. They have authority to make decisions. We need them in the meeting. They're impacted, or they have connections to different stakeholders. But notice what's not in here is that people, they don't have a busy schedule, so we're just going to fill it up with a few meetings, or we want them to feel good. We want to have real reasons for including people in meetings. Then we want to decide on the roles for the meeting. So prior to this presentation today, we had a meeting, or a couple of meetings actually, talking about who was going to do what. I'm not advancing the slides. Dr. Woolsey's doing that. We decided that ahead of time. So deciding on who is going to do what in the meeting is important, and primarily who's going to facilitate, who's going to start the talking, who's going to take notes, who is going to manage the handouts or manage the chat or whatever. So decide on this ahead of time so that you're not floundering around with it at the beginning of the meeting. And then finally, be clear about the purpose and the agenda for the meeting. This is actually really important. Now, when we say an agenda, it doesn't need to be 8 things. It could be just 1 or 2 things, but it's important that people know what those 1 or 2 things are. So again, they can be prepared to contribute on those topics and to contribute on just those topics, not other topics. We're actually narrowing down what it is we're gonna talk about. So sending that information out prior is a really helpful thing to do. Now, as I said, an agenda can be long or short, but we want to be realistic with the time frame that we've got. So if we've got 45 minutes, we want to make sure we only have an agenda that is good for 45 minutes. Now I learned this the hard way some years ago when I had someone prepared to speak at a meeting, and we ran out of time. We just didn't have enough time to get to her agenda item. And I didn't think it was a big deal until she let me know that it was a big deal. She let me have it, because she had spent a significant amount of time preparing for her item, and I had disrespected that time, And so, this kind of preparation is really important to avoid those kinds of things. So starting the meeting outright. Now, again, you think, oh, allow chit chat. Well, why would that be an important thing? It's actually really quite important. Again, that social function of meetings, about building relationships and trust, that chit chat in the first couple of minutes of a meeting can actually be, it reduces anxiety, it gets people familiar with each other, it sort of orients people to each other, and it gets people ready to participate. Now, we don't want to do this for 25 minutes, that's a waste of people's time. But the first couple of minutes, allowing people to chit chat is often a healthy thing to do. Now, some groups actually formalize this with certain activities, which is a good thing to do because it actually encourages everybody to participate in that chit chat as opposed to just a few people. But allowing that is actually a healthy thing to do. Second of all, introductions. Now, these are important, but we got to bear in mind what kind of a meeting we're in as to how much time to spend on this. So if we're doing a recurring meeting where we're going to be working together over time, you can spend a bit of time on this, getting to know each other and activities to introduce one another and things like that. But if it's a one-off meeting, again, spending 20 minutes in a 45-minute meeting doing introductions is not a good use of time. So you want to be efficient, who's in the room, what's your name, who do you work for, and what do you do, kind of thing, very, very quickly. Now, this is actually important, especially when we're engaging with external stakeholders, because we want to be sensitive about the things that we might divulge or say, and that's not about being secretive, it's about being sensitive and timing. We might be considering a new policy. And if we blurt that out, we may actually create a bunch of anxiety that we're not ready to manage right now. So introductions are actually important, but we should be strategic about how much time we spend on it. Third, establishing ground rules. Now, people are famous for breaking ground rules all the time, but I don't think that means we shouldn't engage with them. So this is just where you, particularly for recurring meetings, where you articulate sort of the rules of conduct within the meeting that you're going to be having together, whether that's starting on time and ending on time, or whether that's putting your laptop away and focusing on the meeting, or whatever that is. I've listed a few things that you could consider for ground rules. There may be others that you would want to consider. And then finally, for starting the meeting, for recurring meetings, you want to review previous assignments. So if people were assigned to do X, Y, and Z, you want to follow up with those items at the beginning of the next meeting to see how those things went. That's that accountability function again. And then finally, before I hand over here, facilitating the meeting. So a good facilitator actually doesn't have to speak a whole lot. Their main task is to make sure the meeting is headed in the right direction. It's going to the purpose and the agenda for the meeting. And if that's happening by itself, you don't need to talk. You know, that's a good thing. But there's a couple of other roles that a good facilitator plays, and I've listed them here regarding managing people. So ensuring that quiet people have a voice is important. A lot of your quiet people have great ideas, and just because they're not speaking doesn't mean those ideas don't exist. And there's a whole lot of reasons why people don't speak up. And it could be cultural, it could be personality, or whatever it is. But actually encouraging those people to participate is a good role for a facilitator to play. Affirming contributions. So here is where someone may actually present an idea that doesn't belong really on the agenda, doesn't belong in this meeting. Now you've got a choice there, especially as a leader. You can either put that down, well, what a dumb idea, that doesn't belong. Why the heck are you bringing that up? You know, that kind of narrative not only puts people down today, it puts them down in future meetings as well. And we want to avoid that. We want to be open and encourage participation. So validating participation while also managing the content is an important role for facilitators to play. And they may do that with parking lots, and it validates that the idea came out, but it puts it over here so they don't have to spend too much time on it. And then finally, with managing people, encouraging dissent. So this is, now we're not talking about rebellion, we're not talking about argumentation. What we're talking about here is making sure that we're getting to the right decision or to the right conclusion. Now, you may be in a meeting, you see everybody nodding, right? You've all seen everybody nodding. Now we may think, well, that means everybody agrees. No, it doesn't. People nod for all sorts of reasons. I'm nodding because I understand what you're saying, even though I disagree with it. I may be nodding because I want to get along with everyone. There's a whole bunch of, now whenever you see sort of global agreement, especially on sensitive topics, you want to sort of step back and say, well, okay, it looks like everybody's agreeing here, but let's see if we can articulate any reasons why this may be the bad way to go, even if you don't believe that. So getting some dissent out so that we make sure that we get to a good decision, not just we don't want groupthink. If you're familiar with the term groupthink, which is where people just sort of socially sort of cohese around a set of ideas just to be safe as a group. History has replete with these examples where that happened and bad things come as a result of it. And then finally, clarifying decisions and assignments. So we bookend our meetings with, who did what and how did that go? And then who's going to do what by when. We bookend our meetings like that. Okay, so if there's some questions, I'll be glad to answer those, or those I'm going to hand over to Dr. Woolsey.
We do have one question for you, Dean. Laurie would like you to define what you mean by share the air. I think it was your second to last slide.
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't cover all those points. So this is where we, sometimes people dominate the conversation just as a matter of, they've got a lot of knowledge, or they like to talk. Some people just like to talk. Share the air just means it primes people to think about, okay, if I'm talking for 15 minutes, that means other people are not talking and I'm not sharing the air. So sharing the air is just being a bit more sensitive to the fact that, there's a reason that other people are in the meeting and giving them an opportunity to speak. The other thing that I didn't hit on, which is probably worth hitting on, is the one topic, one conversation. I think that's a healthy rule to have, so that everybody is focused on the same conversation, the same topic at the same time, instead of having splinter groups, talking about different things. Okay, thank you for that question. It's a good one.
Hey, Richard, this is Sarah. Any other questions?
That's all the questions we have in the chat. Are there any others? We can throw them into the chat, and we can grab Dean at the end of the presentation if we have more. Let's go ahead and move on with Sarah. Dr. Woolsey.
Thanks, you guys. And Dean, thank you again for an excellent review and reminders of elements of meetings. I'm going to talk about the hybrid meeting. Obviously, this is something that has been part of our lives now more and more over the last 2 years. And how can we really ensure these are excellent meetings? I'm going to start with just what do we mean, and we mean any in-person meeting with a virtual participant, and an event that requires technology-supported attendance added to traditional in-person meetings. Hopefully we'll have more in-person opportunities as things are opening up and people are moving back into the workplace somewhat, but we will always have these technology-supported add-ons. My guess is we'll never fully leave that. The link here is to a really good document where I got some of the content that talks about all kinds of meetings and specifically hybrids. The scope for today is going to be that virtual participant in a single location, tapping into a larger in-person event. There are lots of more complex types of meetings, and if you do those, you're going to need more than this 15 minutes I've got for you to orchestrate those. So that's a topic for another day. Why are we talking about this? As I mentioned, this is the new reality. 80 to 90% of our meetings now are going to have an online component, and that's beautiful. We have a mandate for anchor meetings. How many of us host those where we're going to have, staff and a couple people in a room, but really majority of attendees now are going to be online. We have designed a community of state employees that are in different places by design, and we want to tap into that and make it really, really comfortable for all of us to work with our virtual stakeholders in other places. And then remote work is welcome for surge days or when infection risk elevates. This again will be an opportunity we have for time eternal because we're getting good at this. Okay, so more important to me though is to answer the question, why are well done hybrid meetings important? Okay, why do we want them to be well done? Our relationships depend on success. A currency that many of us have in our work is relationships and communication. And meetings are a place where you want to be good at that. So we want to be professional. We want to respect our attendees' time investment. If they've tapped in or they've walked over to our meeting, we want it to be useful. We want to ensure communication and decisions occur, despite the fact that somebody's in rural Utah and other people are on the Wasatch Front. We want to foster attendance. We want people to say, I go to those meetings because we get our jobs done and we get out and we get on to the other important business of the day. And then we need to replace connections of the in-person. So those soft things that occur can still happen even if we're far apart. Okay, so as you know, there's new opportunities, but there are also new risks. These new tools that we have, chat, polling, these are things we didn't have in our typical in-person meetings necessarily. Chat's kind of like passing notes in class, right? It's a second set of communication that occurs while a typical communication is occurring. That's a huge opportunity for engagement, but it's also risk. We have concise events. People not having to travel is a huge benefit. We can orchestrate small group discussions. We can intentionally plan that. Whereas in group meetings, maybe that's a little harder to do. We have to have side conversations orchestrated. I have literally scheduled meeting after the meeting time for people who want to jump in and do that thing we usually do after a meeting ends, but we have to orchestrate that. We know a risk is tech can fail. We know that attendees may lose focus, and collaborative discussions can be a challenge for some, as Dean described. We're tapping into complex communication styles in our meetings in person or online, and now a hybrid adds even more to that. Are there any questions or comments, Richard, as I stop for a second and give people a chance?
Not yet.
Okay, let's move to best practices. I'm gonna tap into the important things that come with a hybrid meeting, okay? Dean has talked a lot about these things for general meetings, but what's special for hybrids? So number one, we need to think of the capacity of the attendee. And that's not just the virtual attendee, it's also the in-room. What's there for technology, bandwidth, skills to use a platform and manage people on a screen in a room as well as people in a room? What are people's attention spans? What format of presentations are going to be used? And can you manage those, again, in that duplicated space? What kind of discussion or dialogue are going to be needed? What do you need to plan for? What staff or roles are needed to execute the meeting well? Dean talked about some of the roles, but in hybrid meetings, there may be a little bit more you want to think about. Obviously, we have the MC or the facilitator, but they can't do all the other things. You're going to need to think about tech support before. Do you need to get people engaged before you use the platform at the time of the event? Do you need to have that chat connector or watcher like we're having Richard do today? You need them to have attention on that, or you're going to miss something that happens when you're paying attention to people in the room and online. Maybe you have media. How many of you guys have attended a meeting and a video is supposed to be shown and it doesn't work because you haven't synced it with the platform? Or I played some music through Zoom once and it sounds terrible on Zoom to play a YouTube music video. You're going to need a recorder and note taker. This is a shout out to anybody who expects good notes for a meeting. You cannot have that person also running the computer that has the video or the chat or the presentation. You're going to likely need a second device or to take that note taker offline to do a good job if you need them to do it real time. And then time creepers are important in any setting. You'll note that just getting people onto a meeting or into a room and syncing a hybrid meeting takes a few minutes longer than a typical meeting. So you may need to give that time to occur. Think about, do you need to test and attendee platforms ahead? If you're using this with partners that you're not sure if they can use Google Meet, you need to have them test and load that onto their device. Test media, as I mentioned, you don't know the video is going to work. You don't know the remote video is going to work. Test it ahead. Test sound and connectivity in the room you're going to use because you want to make sure that there's not distracting echoes or things in a room for the virtual attendee. Is that room a busy room? Do you need to schedule time ahead to set up and test? Do you need to test your remote speaker capacity to present? Can they advance their slides? Can they get on their microphone? What will happen when they present their video? Make sure you test that ahead. And I really think dress rehearsals are great, especially if you have a high importance event. Do a dress rehearsal with all the players there. Plan for a phone connection in addition to online sound. Again, if there's something critical, have that backup available. If you need to record because it's a mandate for the meeting, ensure someone's paying attention to that, not distracted, and gets that started right away. And then finally, saving the chat. Do you know how to do it? Do you need to do it? Those are things to plan ahead. This is a best practice I'd like to encourage everyone to use, especially with outside meetings. Maybe internally we're gotten capacity with Google Meet, but outside it may not be as intuitive. So I'll share this slide deck. You can steal this one. You tell people where their microphone is, how to turn their camera on. We had the closed captioning suggestion with Richard at the beginning of this meeting. That's a great one. How to raise your hand, okay? We wanted people to know where the chat is. May not be intuitive for people that don't use this platform. And then I'm going to demonstrate a poll. That triangle, square, circle thing, that's where polls are. And that's where people will need to look when you say we're going to do a poll. So teach them how to use it. And don't think this is a waste of time, because you never know that one person that has something to say that needs help navigating. With Zoom, I will not spend a ton of time on this. Similar features, but very important now. They have buried the raise hand in reactions. It's not intuitive. I've been in meetings where we ask people to comment by raising their hands, and they don't know where to do that. And when you teach them, you suddenly get a lot of hands raised. So make sure and demonstrate this reaction, raise hand for people that are especially important to hear their voices, like in a public meeting. And then want to mention this, people who are just on the phone, and we have some people that connectivity is best for them, they can actually raise hand by *9, and they mute and unmute with that *6, but you got to teach them to do it. So consider putting that into your spiel as you start meetings where you know there's remote attendees, again, that you want their voice to be heard. Okay, I'm going to show you guys polling. I don't know how many people have tried this. Google Meet is actually really excellent for on-the-fly polling. It can be also a great option to use. I encourage people to open this up and practice. So I've set up this poll ahead of time. So I click on the triangle, square, circle. I click on poll. I've already put my content in, which you have to do after you've launched the meeting. So hard to save things in Google. And now I'm going to launch. And I'll ask for some feedback from Richard. Do people see the poll? Do you see my poll?
Yeah, if click on that the triangle, square, circle, and you should be able to see it there, and you can start to vote.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So yes, so you launch the poll. I can't see the little one come up, but I know that a poll comes up there. You click. Now I'm using this poll as an educational tool. Like, I'm going to give you guys a little factoid with this, but you can also do polls to help you make decisions. You're obviously breaking up the meeting. You're using that sort of adult attention span to do something else and get them interested. And then obviously when you show the results, you can have a discussion about that. So this is a technique to use in meetings that can be useful, but what you can do in the room? Think about in the room. Are you going to have people raise their hand? Are you going to have them have their laptop there to take the poll? How do you add their voices to the poll when you have a hybrid meeting? Think about that and practice it if you're going to do it. I'm going to end the poll, okay? And you guys have all read up, or 31 to 45 minutes is ideal. Can you guys see the results, Richard?
Yeah, they should be able to. I've got it marked to see them. Are you able to see them? Click on that on the shapes again and see if you can see the results there.
Can you see the results? Okay, yeah. Thank you guys for who's commenting. So you guys have read up. 31 to 45 minutes is that ideal attention span time, really, for in-person or a hybrid or a virtual meeting. And it depends, right? It may be shorter or longer, just as Dean talked to us. But ideal for virtual is going to be really no more than 45 minutes. And if it's longer, you're going to break it up with polls. You're going to break it up with breaks. You're going to have different ways to divert their attention. But this was an example of using a poll. I would encourage everybody to open up that little triangle circle thing in your next meeting. If you're the host, you can do that and practice with a poll. I've used this to actually bring a group to consensus as the DHHS was working on some consolidation topics. We were actually able to do a vote to kind of make our decision-making faster in a hybrid meeting. So use the poll when it's beneficial to you. Okay. I'm going to keep moving.
Dr. Woolsey, we do have a couple of questions.
Sure. Let's do that. Yeah.
First question, and I'm not sure if I have an answer for it either, and I'm not sure if you will, but Tammy wants to know if there are resources that DHRM has or DTS has that will help with the technology. I'll have to do some research for you, Tammy, and I'll try to get back to you on that one. And then Joshua also wants to ask, the Star 6 and the Star 9 features work for Google Meet as well as Zoom?
So I know Star 6 works. I don't know about Star 9. And that would be a really good thing to learn since we do so many meetings in Google Meet, but I know that it does work in Zoom.
And then we also had a couple of problems with the poll. It looks to me like we would need to, the very first time you try it, you're going to need a little bit of time to practice because it's pretty straightforward, but there is a bit of a learning curve. So plan a little extra time to practice, but once you've done it once and people are used to it, it'll go really quickly.
Okay, good. And a good example of practicing and getting your audience more familiar. We could have done like a really simple poll and made sure everybody knew how to do it first. And then we do that more important poll second. So if you've got a new group, maybe consider that. Great comment.
Yeah, and then there was one other person put a link to some Google training resources for Google Meet. So if you're looking for that, there's a link there in the chat.
Thank you. All right, excellent. Crowdsource. All right, I'm going to continue. To move on, I've got a screenshot here of also in Google is Breakout Rooms. I don't know if you guys have done those, but that is really an exciting thing to use as well. You can do Breakout Rooms, send people off to those rooms, moderate that, get the feedback. That's a good way to break up the meeting or make smaller groups feel comfortable talking. Moderated chat, we're working on that. That was a great example for Richard to make sure that the people in the chat were heard and listened to, that their contributions and links are announced to others. So it really has people feel included in the meeting. So that's an intentional and important part of what we do. Test voices early, both your voices in the room as well as your voices online. If I have a small meeting, I'll just say hello to everybody as they join. Make sure their mic's working. Maybe sure that there's not a connectivity issue. Get them to fix that before you get into the meat of the meeting. And then same thing in the room, practice. How are we gonna all introduce ourselves? And then how are we gonna go to the people that are on the screen? Set ground rules for sharing. Give people options. If you want them to chat, tell them. If you want them to raise their hand, tell them and instruct them how to do it. If you want to have the people on the phone interrupt at certain times, tell them how to do that, or intentionally orchestrate your meeting to pause and address the people in the virtual, address the people on the phone. I know for me, I'm an extrovert. I like those in-person meetings. I like to ensure that I connect to people that are near me. I have to practice engaging with people that aren't physically in the room with me. Get people talking in the first 5 minutes. This is something I learned in presenting a long time ago in large groups. Have them chat, have them unmute and say something, have them do a little game or whatever. As Dean said, it's that social aspect, but it gets their voices ready. It gets their fingers limber to chat. It has them realize you're going to be calling on them again. So get them talking the first 5 minutes. Documents, if you're showing them, did you send them ahead in case someone's not able to see them online? If you're printing agendas, how do you want to handle that in the room or when you're sending them virtually? I'll describe a brief mention. We co-edited a document with a woman who lived in Montezuma Creek. She had very unreliable internet. We were doing a Zoom editing with a group, both in person and online, and she was just on the phone. We made sure she had the document, and we referred to the pages carefully as we discussed, and she used the star 9 to raise her hand. We were able to do that despite the fact she was so far away. Her voice was critically important to this document, but we had to alter our virtual meeting to make it work for her. Font size, big pet peeve of mine. At the Department of Health, we show lots of people Excel spreadsheets, and they're like so itty bitty, nobody can see them in a room, nobody can see them online. Really practice knowing it's 125 or it's 150 blow up when I present, so my audience can see it, and practice that ahead. And then finally, if your evaluation is important to your meeting, build it into your meeting. Finish a couple of minutes early. Put the evaluation in the chat. Invite people before they ever log off to give you feedback, and make that part of what you do. It saves time and it increases your response time. Again, we've commented a couple times about pausing to make sure virtual participants could chime in. You got to practice that, especially if you're excited to be back in the room with people. Make sure that online person gets attention. Vice versa, if you have a lot of people online and only maybe one in the room, you've got to practice making sure that one person gets engaged, like in an anchor meeting. Make sure you address those phone-only people. Get someone to watch for hands raising. There can be a sound cue sometimes, or somebody's watching for you, but you don't want to miss that and move on to a topic when someone on your virtual meeting has a great thing to say. And then that chat watcher, as we've mentioned. I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions.
There are a couple of questions, Dr. Woolsey. We've got Levi was in an international virtual meeting, and the moderator from the United States kept the outside time limits. Like when people would hit their time limit, they would remind them. There were many individuals that were a little annoyed by that. And so he wonders, is there any best practices for how to slow down long-winded people and how to help people that don't talk much speak in the same meeting? Do you have any best practices for that?
Yeah, and actually also, Dean, if you'd like to add something, we can. But a couple things, I've actually been having this challenge, and again, recently was in an open meeting where we had a lot of people and not a lot of time. And I'm actually personally going to practice the actually a sound, a chime, like they do at the legislature, actually a sound cue that gets people to realize it's time, because that is not as intrusive as a voice or interrupting someone, and they may not see a chat, especially if they're really going on and on. Dean, do you have anything you want to add?
I think that's good. The only other thought that I have is again, sort of how these meetings are set up. Some of those ground rules. There's a lot of people in the meeting, so any comments, please keep them brief. You can sort of set that up as a ground rule at the beginning, so that sort of primes people to be a bit more sensitive about that. But I think what you're saying is some people just they can't stop themselves, right? And so that's where a good facilitator sort of helps, maybe even summarize what they're saying very quickly and sort of helps you move on.
So Liz always asks great questions. I love it when Elizabeth Craker's in your meeting. I'm actually personally going to get a sound on my phone and do it with my phone, but I welcome anybody who's more technical. There is a Zoom clock we have discovered where you can actually have everyone see the Zoom clock, but they have to be on that screen. So that's a challenge. So I'm actually going to get a sound on my phone and push it, or a bell. That's what I'm going to do, Liz. But I welcome more tech savvy people to be thinking about it. I love that. Any other questions, Richard?
Yeah, we do have a question. This is maybe a crowdsourced question.
Yeah.
Are there any rooms at the MASOB that are set up for having hybrid meetings work well? When I am one of the only people virtual, with the majority in the large conference room, I can almost never hear well. This is a real concern. People tuning in virtually can't hear the people in the room.
Absolutely. I welcome folks from the MASOB to talk that through. I know here at Health, we've practiced in my 406 is a real good one, but anybody have a suggestion? And if not, I task you all to work on that and practice that. Okay, good. Okay, keep going, Richard.
Yeah, how to help a leader who is charged with leading hybrid meetings, but who is not very well versed with technology.
Yeah, so that to me goes right to roles. You're going to arm them with a person who can help them. And this means that you may have a little more staff in a meeting, but you need to really, you need to get that person there. I will say this, and my husband, he doesn't mind it, but I say it. I married tech support. I often need my husband to help me work on stuff, but I know that I need it. And so I have no hesitation to say, hey, we need that really savvy person to do X, Y, Z. So I would say having a conversation, you could share this content with them. You could pull the document that I shared in my first slide to open that conversation, but then you need to provide them someone who can really do it. I can do presenting, but some of the other stuff I can't do, and that's why we have extra people there. Any other questions, Richard?
We have one question. How do you send a sound chime? And I think you answered that by you're downloading a chime onto your phone and then just hitting it through your microphone.
Yep.
A reminder that sound chimes don't work for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. So we'd need to find another, probably visual cue if we have folks who need that accommodation.
Good.
And then we have some suggestions for our MESOB employee. The OWL meeting, I guess it's a microphone / camera. It's called the OWL. And it sounds like maybe they have one at the MESOB. You may want to talk to the people who are in charge of the meeting and ask them to make some adjustments there. According to Brenda, the MESOB has a room called the boardroom, and it's been adjusted so sound quality is better and folks can hear. Another couple of endorsements for the OWL. At Water Resources, our conference room has great sound, but people in the room have to talk one at a time, and that takes practice. The OWL is ideal if you don't have the budget for an OWL. $100 USB speakerphone also makes a huge difference. And then there's a couple.
We have a lot of good content here, or got suggestions.
Just finishing reading through these.
Yeah, I want to just mention, if anybody from MESOB is really good at hybrid meetings and you're willing to share your contact information, put it in the chat or message someone who's struggling that I think it's really good to learn from people that have solved this. If you're over at Canon, feel free to reach out to me and my team. We've really worked on this over time. So if you find a subject matter expert and you're willing to share, help people out. What else, Richard?
A reminder for people in a meeting in person to be quiet while others are talking so that the people virtually can hear. The crowd noise tends to drown out speakers. And then Bailey's asking how we can ensure everyone has access to these off-the-shelf meetings. One of her coworkers. That's a note for me. It should go out statewide. So if she has a utah.gov email address, she should be getting them. There's a phone number here for water quality, and they're happy to pass on any information or the knowledge that they have of the hybrid meetings there in water quality.
Thank you.
That's all we have.
All right, excellent. So again, you guys, this is an example of more information coming because we have chat. We have a chat moderator, and we've built in a little bit of time to do this. So really appreciate that. Last thing, and Richard, if you're able to put this in the chat, we'll also share this in his meeting information. I've done a checklist. I think checklists are excellent, especially when you have high stakes meetings that are really important, especially our public meetings. Get a checklist. Make sure you check all those boxes and look at the checklist over a week ahead of the meeting. Number 2, checklists are great training tools. You have a new staff that you're going to have help you with these meetings and you want to increase the speed by which they do it right, give them a checklist and ask them to use it and check it off. It's a great tool for training and cooperation as you hold a hybrid meeting. And you'll adapt this to your setting and to your needs. It has much of the content from my talk today. All right. That's it unless there's more questions. We're gonna wrap up. I've asked Richard to also demonstrate putting the feedback link in the chat. Ahead of you guys who are still here logging off, you can actually give us direct feedback while it's fresh, get that task done, and then Richard can add this to his bank of knowledge for future meetings. Are there any other questions, Richard? And thank you for putting that chat in, or that link in for them. He'll also send it by email as traditional.
Yeah, there was one last question. When should we use Zoom over Google Meet? And really, I think that's just a matter of preference. But do you have any thoughts on that, Dr. Woolsey?
Yeah, I would say for very large meetings, in general, Zoom is preferred. I think there's a little more functionality with a large group. I also think it depends on if you don't have people familiar with with an online format. Zoom is at this point a little more common. Within the state, it's Google, but pretty much outside the state, it's not Google Meet. But then my answer is use the one you're good at and teach your audience to be to connect to the platform. So whatever one you're good at, train people that you're working with to be good at it, and that will be the best platform.
Great. Thank you. Thank you.
All
All
right.
right, everybody. Thanks very much for your time and attention today. Just remember, next month on the 16th, 1 month from today, we will discuss truth and transparency tools for managing performance. Thanks again. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Richard. Have a good day. Bye, Dean.
Thanks. Bye-bye, everyone.